Sometimes the heart breaks so completely that you forget it was ever meant to love again. Sometimes grief becomes so familiar that you mistake it for home. Nora Whitfield knows this truth better than most. 3 years ago, she lost her husband and young son in a car accident that left her world silent and empty. Now she runs a small herbal shop in Cedar Falls, helping others heal while her own wounds remain untouched. When Calder Voss arrives in town with his sick daughter, he's just another broken soul seeking remedies she can provide. This former soldier carries his own heavy burdens, and his child needs healing that doctors cannot give. But when two people who have stopped believing in second chances find each other, something unexpected begins to bloom. Can they learn to trust love again? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through the tall pines surrounding Cedar Falls, casting long shadows across the cobblestone main street that had witnessed a century of quiet mountain life. Nora Whitfield unlocked the weathered wooden door of Healing Roots. Her herbal shop nestled between Murphy's Hardware and the old post office, just as she had every morning for the past 3 years. The brass bell above the door chimed softly, a sound that once brought her husband Thomas rushing from the back room with flour-dusted hands and a warm smile. Now it announced only her solitary presence to the shelves lined with amber bottles, dried bundles of sage and lavender, and the accumulated wisdom of generations who had found comfort in nature's pharmacy. At 38, Nora moved through her morning routine with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to find purpose in predictability. She lit the small wood stove in the corner, its warmth pushing back the October chill that crept through the old windows. The familiar ritual, grinding fresh herbs, organizing tinctures, checking the moisture levels in her drying bundles, provided a framework for days that might otherwise drift into the endless grey of grief. Her shop occupied the ground floor of a Victorian house that had been in her family for 4 generations. Upstairs, 2 bedrooms sat mostly unused since the accident. She'd moved her own bed into what had once been Tommy's nursery, unable to sleep in the room she'd shared with Thomas, unwilling to disturb the careful arrangement of toy trucks and picture books that waited for a little boy who would never come home. The shop itself was a testament to the healing wisdom passed down through the Whitfield women. Her great-grandmother had started with a simple herb garden behind the house. Her grandmother had expanded it into a proper business, learning from the Cherokee women who had once called these mountains home. Her mother had modernized just enough to survive the changing times while keeping the essential knowledge intact. Now Nora carried that legacy alone, wearing it like armor against a world that had taken too much too quickly. The bell chimed again as Mrs. Eleanor Hartwell pushed through the door, bringing with her the scent of autumn air and the comfortable familiarity of routine. At 73, Eleanor had been coming to Healing Roots for her arthritis remedy longer than Nora had been mixing it. "Good morning, dear," Eleanor said, unwrapping a hand-knitted scarf from around her neck. "I swear this weather is getting into my bones earlier each year." Nora smiled, the gentle, professional smile she'd perfected for customers who meant well, but couldn't understand that some pains went deeper than joints and sinew. "The willow bark tea should help with the inflammation. I have your usual blend ready." She moved behind the polished oak counter that Thomas had built during their first year of marriage, when they'd still believed they had decades to perfect their life together. The counter bore the small scars of daily use, ring stains from countless teacups, knife marks from cutting herbs, and a heart carved into one corner that Tommy had made with a nail when he was 4. And proud of his artistic achievement and unaware that his parents would treasure that small defacement forever. "How are you holding up, Nora?" Eleanor's voice carried the careful gentleness that everyone in Cedar Falls used when speaking to her now. 3 years was apparently long enough for most people to expect healing, but not quite long enough to stop treating her like fragile glass. "I'm well, Mrs. Hartwell, keeping busy." The response came automatically. Nora measured dried willow bark into a small cloth bag, her movements precise and economical. She'd learned that efficiency discouraged extended conversations about her well-being. Eleanor's weathered hands accepted the remedy with a slight tremor. "You know, my Harold used to say that the heart has its own seasons. Sometimes we think spring will never come, but it always does, dear. Always." The words hung in the air like incense, well-meaning but misplaced. Nora had heard variations of this sentiment from half the town. They meant well. These people who had known her since childhood, who remembered her wedding day and Tommy's first steps down this very street. But their comfort felt like pressure now, an expectation that she should bloom again on schedule. The grief should follow the same reliable patterns as her carefully tended herbs. After Eleanor left, Nora turned her attention to the greenhouse attached to the back of the shop. Here, surrounded by growing things, she felt most like herself, or like the person she was learning to become. Rows of medicinal plants thrived under her careful attention. Echinacea for immune support, chamomile for anxiety, valerian for sleepless nights. She knew each plant's needs, its harvesting schedule, its particular gifts for healing. Working with her hands in the rich soil, she could almost forget the constant ache in her chest. The plants didn't ask her how she was feeling or suggest that she should start dating again. They simply grew or didn't, responded to care or withered from neglect, following the honest laws of nature that made more sense than the complicated expectations of human society. The greenhouse had been Thomas's wedding gift to her, built with his carpenter's hands and filled with starts from her mother's garden. He'd surprised her with it on their first anniversary, leading her out back with his hands over her eyes, revealing the glass sanctuary that would become her refuge. "For all the healing you'll do," he'd said, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they stood in the doorway. "For our neighbors, for strangers who need help, and maybe someday for our own little ones when they scrape their knees." She'd cried then, overwhelmed by his faith in her and the future they were building together. Now she worked alone among the plants he'd helped her choose, tending growth that felt both like honoring his memory and moving beyond it. By mid-morning, a handful of regulars had come and gone. Jack Morrison picked up his blood pressure blend, making awkward small talk about the weather before hurrying back to his construction crew. Sarah Chen bought chamomile tea for her colicky baby, looking exhausted but grateful for something that might help. Old Pete Brennan shuffled in for his joint pain salve, paying in exact change, counted slowly from a worn leather wallet. Each interaction followed familiar patterns. Nora knew these people's ailments, their families, their stories. She provided what healing she could, accepted their payment and their gentle concern, and maintained the careful distance that kept her functioning. It was nearly noon when she noticed the stranger. He sat in a pickup truck across the street, engine idling, his attention fixed on her shop with the focused stillness of someone accustomed to watching and waiting. Even from this distance, she could see he was large, broad shoulders filling the driver's seat, dark hair catching the autumn sunlight. Something about his posture, the way he held his head, suggested military training. Cedar Falls saw its share of veterans, men and women, seeking the peace that mountain solitude could provide. But this man felt different. Where most newcomers to their small town carried an air of retreat, of seeking sanctuary, this stranger radiated a tension that made Nora's instincts prickle. He wasn't running from something, he was protecting it. The passenger door of the truck opened and a small figure emerged. A child, maybe 8 or 9 years old, moved with the careful gait of someone who wasn't entirely well. Even from across the street, Nora could see the pallor in the child's face. The way small shoulders hunched against more than just the autumn chill. The man, the father, she assumed, came around the truck with swift economical movements. His attention never left the child, one large hand resting protectively on a thin shoulder as they approached the shop. As they drew closer, Nora could see his face more clearly, weathered, with the kind of lines that came from squinting into sun and wind, eyes that constantly scanned their surroundings, even in this peaceful setting. The bell announced their arrival with its usual gentle chime. But somehow the sound felt different this time, like an alarm, or maybe a beginning. "Ma'am," the man said, his voice carrying a slight southern accent roughened by years of shouting over machinery and wind. "I'm hoping you can help us." The child, definitely a girl, Nora could see now, looked up with fever-bright eyes that held too much knowledge for someone so young. Her dark hair had been braided with careful precision, but wisps had escaped to frame a face that would be pretty if not for the grey undertone of illness. "This is my daughter Emma," the man continued. "Doctors down in Denver can't figure out what's wrong with her. Someone at the diner said you might know about things that regular medicine doesn't cover." Nora felt something shift inside her chest. Not the familiar clench of grief, but something else. Recognition, maybe. Or purpose stirring after a long sleep. She knelt to Emma's eye level, keeping her movements slow and non-threatening. "Hello, sweetheart. What's been troubling you?" Emma glanced up at her father for permission before speaking. When he nodded encouragingly, she said, "Everything hurts. My tummy, my head, and I'm always so tired. The doctors gave me lots of tests, but Daddy says they're just guessing." The father's jaw tightened at his daughter's words. "I'm Calder Voss," he said. "We just got to town yesterday. I know this might sound crazy, but I've seen what indigenous medicine can do in places where regular doctors can't help. If there's any chance you know something that might help Emma—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Nora heard everything he wasn't saying. The desperation carefully held in check. The willingness to try anything for his child. The way love could drive someone to hope for miracles in small mountain shops run by widowed women with more questions than answers. Looking into Emma's wan face, Nora felt the first stirring of something she hadn't experienced in 3 years, the desire to truly help, not just go through the motions of her daily routine. This child needed more than willow bark tea and gentle sympathy. She needed someone to see her, to listen to what her small body was trying to say. "Let's sit down," Nora said, gesturing toward the pair of chairs she kept near the wood stove. "Tell me everything." Emma settled into the chair by the wood stove, her small frame dwarfed by the worn leather cushions. She clutched a faded pink blanket against her chest, clearly a comfort object that had seen many nights of restless sleep. The fabric was soft from countless washings, and Nora could see where careful hands had mended small tears with mismatched thread. Calder remained standing, his large frame tense with barely contained anxiety. His eyes never stopped moving, scanning the shop's exits, checking the windows, watching Emma's face for any sign of distress. This wasn't the casual alertness of a concerned father. This was something else entirely. "When did this start?" Nora asked, settling into the chair across from Emma. She kept her voice gentle, the same tone she'd once used to coax stories from her own son when he'd skinned his knee or had a bad dream. "About 6 months ago," Calder answered, when Emma remained quiet. "Started with fatigue. We thought maybe she was just adjusting to—" He stopped himself, glancing at his daughter. "To our move from Colorado. But then came the stomach pain, the headaches. Some days she can barely get out of bed." Emma looked up at Nora with eyes that held far too much weariness for someone so young. "The doctors did lots of tests," she said quietly. "They took my blood and made me drink yucky stuff and put me in a big loud machine. But they said everything looks normal." "Normal," Calder repeated, his voice tight with frustration. "They want to put her on antidepressants, say it might be anxiety or stress. She's 8 years old." Nora studied Emma's face, noting the slight tremor in her small hands, the way she pressed the blanket against her abdomen. The child's skin had a translucent quality that spoke of chronic illness, but her eyes remained alert and intelligent despite the fatigue. "Emma," Nora said softly, "can you tell me about the pain? Does it feel hot or cold? Sharp or dull? Does it move around or stay in one place?" The little girl considered the question with surprising seriousness. "It feels like something's twisted up inside," she said finally. "Like when you wring out a washcloth, except it's my tummy. And sometimes it spreads up to my chest and makes it hard to breathe." Nora nodded thoughtfully. In her years of studying traditional healing, she'd learned that children often described their symptoms with startling accuracy when given the right questions. Their bodies hadn't yet learned to lie or minimize discomfort the way adults did, and the tired feeling. Like I'm trying to walk through thick mud, Emma said. Even when I sleep all night, I wake up feeling like I ran a really long race. Calder's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Nora could see the military training in his posture, the way he held himself ready for action, even in this peaceful setting. But beneath the controlled exterior, she glimpsed something raw, the helpless desperation of a parent watching their child suffer. "Mr. Voss," she said carefully, "can you tell me about Emma's medical history? Any surgeries, major illnesses, family history of autoimmune conditions?" Something flickered across Calder's face, a moment of hesitation that made Nora's intuition prickle. "She's always been healthy," he said finally. "No major illnesses, no surgeries. As for family history," another pause. "It's complicated." Emma shifted in her chair, drawing the blanket higher around her shoulders. "Daddy says my first mommy got sick when I was little, before I could remember her." The words hung in the air, creating more questions than they answered. Nora sensed layers of story here, loss and displacement that went beyond simple medical history. But pressing for details wouldn't help Emma feel better, and right now, that was what mattered most. "Can I look at your hands, sweetheart?" Nora asked. Emma extended her small hands obediently. Nora took them gently, noting their coolness despite the warmth of the room. The child's pulse was rapid but steady, her fingernails showing the slight ridging that sometimes indicated nutritional deficiencies. "What about food?" Nora asked. "Are there things that make you feel worse, better?" "Everything makes my tummy hurt," Emma said sadly. "Even soup. Daddy tries to make me eat, but sometimes I just can't." Calder's jaw tightened. "She's lost 12 pounds in the last 4 months. The doctors want to put in a feeding tube if she doesn't start gaining weight soon." The desperation in his voice was carefully controlled, but unmistakable. Nora had heard that tone before, from parents who had exhausted conventional options and were grasping for alternatives. But something about Calder's intensity suggested this was about more than medical frustration. This man was accustomed to solving problems, to taking action when his loved ones were threatened. Being helpless in the face of his daughter's illness was clearly torture for him. "I'd like to try something," Nora said slowly. "It's gentle, and it won't interfere with anything the doctors have prescribed. But I need you both to trust me." Emma nodded immediately, but Calder's eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of something?" "Traditional remedies that work with the body's natural healing processes. My grandmother learned them from Cherokee healers who lived in these mountains long before our families arrived. They understood that sometimes illness comes from things being out of balance, physical, emotional, spiritual." "You're talking about alternative medicine," Calder said, his tone carefully neutral. "I'm talking about medicine that's been working for thousands of years," Nora replied firmly. "Before pharmaceuticals, before laboratories, people healed from things that would baffle modern doctors. Not through magic or wishful thinking, but through understanding how the body's systems connect and support each other." She stood and moved to her preparation area, selecting several glass jars from the shelves. "Emma, these herbs will help settle your stomach and give your body the nutrients it needs to start healing. Some will taste better than others, but I promise nothing will make you feel worse." As she measured dried ginger, fennel, and chamomile into a mixing bowl, she felt Calder's intense scrutiny. This man was evaluating her competence, her trustworthiness, her potential to help or harm his daughter. The weight of his assessment was almost physical. "The doctors said to avoid anything that isn't FDA approved," he said quietly. Nora paused in her measuring, meeting his gaze directly. "Mr. Voss, I'm not suggesting you ignore medical advice, but I am suggesting that sometimes healing requires looking beyond what standard medicine can offer. Your daughter is suffering, and conventional treatments aren't helping. Do you want to try something different, or would you rather continue with the same approaches that have failed her so far?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Emma watched the exchange with the unnerving perceptiveness of children who had learned to read adult emotions for signs of their own safety. What exactly are you proposing? Calder asked finally. A gentle digestive tea to start, designed to reduce inflammation and support her system's natural healing processes. If that helps, we can try some topical treatments for the pain and fatigue. Everything I suggest will be documented, measured, and monitored. I'm not asking you to abandon medical care. I'm asking you to supplement it with approaches that have helped people for generations. She returned to her preparation, grinding the herbs with practiced movements. The familiar actions calmed her own nerves as much as they demonstrated her expertise. Emma, would you like to smell these herbs? Sometimes our bodies know what they need before our minds do. The little girl nodded eagerly, the first sign of genuine interest she'd shown since arriving. Nora brought the bowl over, holding it where Emma could inhale the gentle, spicy fragrance. It smells like Christmas, Emma said, a small smile brightening her pale face. And like when Daddy makes pancakes on Sunday morning? Good, Nora said warmly. That means your body recognizes these as healing foods, not medicine. Sometimes the best remedies don't feel like treatment at all. She returned to the preparation area, adding hot water to the herbs and letting them steep. The shop filled with the comforting aroma of traditional healing, scents that had provided comfort and relief long before the first hospital was built. How long before we know if it's working? Calder asked. Some effects you might notice today, less nausea, maybe some improvement in her appetite. But real healing takes time. Her body has been struggling for months. We need to give it several weeks to remember how to function properly. Emma sipped the tea tentatively, her face screwing up slightly at the unfamiliar taste. But after a moment she took another sip, then another. It's warm, she said wonderingly. It makes my tummy feel warm instead of twisty. Nora felt a familiar flutter of hope, the same sensation she'd experienced years ago when her remedies first began helping people. It was a feeling she'd almost forgotten. During her long months of grief and isolation. That's a good sign, she told Emma. Your body is saying thank you. Calder watched his daughter with intense attention, cataloguing every change in her expression and posture. When Emma finished half the cup and asked for more, Nora saw something shift in his face. Not quite hope yet, but the first loosening of defensive tension. She hasn't finished a drink in weeks, he said quietly. The herbs are helping her system accept nourishment, Nora explained. If this continues to help, we can work on strengthening her digestion and building up her energy reserves. Emma curled up in the leather chair, her comfort blanket wrapped around her shoulders, cradling the warm cup in both hands. For the first time since they'd arrived, she looked like what she was, a tired child who might be starting to feel a little bit better. I want to stay here, she announced suddenly. This place feels safe. The words hit both adults with unexpected force. Calder's protective mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something vulnerable and desperate beneath. Nora felt her carefully maintained emotional barriers trembling. You can come back tomorrow, she heard herself saying. We'll try the tea again and see how you're feeling. Emma beamed, the first genuine smile Nora had seen from her. Can I bring my coloring books? Of course. Nora glanced at Calder, seeing his internal struggle between hope and skepticism, between the need to protect his daughter and the desperate desire for someone else to help carry that burden. We'll take this one day at a time, she said to both of them. No promises except that we'll pay attention to what works and adjust what doesn't. As they prepared to leave, Emma carefully folded her blanket and looked up at Nora with serious eyes. Thank you for believing me about the twisted feeling. The doctor said it was probably in my head. Nora knelt down to Emma's level, her heart clenching with protective anger at any adult who would dismiss a child's pain as imaginary. Your pain is real, Emma. Your body is trying to tell us something important, and we're going to listen to it. The little girl impulsively reached out and hugged Nora, a quick, fierce embrace that caught them both by surprise. In that moment, Nora felt something crack open inside her chest, letting in the first shaft of light she'd experienced since the accident. Calder's hand settled protectively on Emma's shoulder, but his eyes met Nora's with an expression she couldn't quite read, gratitude mixed with something else, something that made her pulse quicken unexpectedly. "Tomorrow, then," he said, his southern accent more pronounced than before. "Same time." "Same time," Nora agreed, watching them walk back to their truck. Emma moved more easily now, her step lighter despite the lingering fatigue. Calder kept one hand on her back, but his rigid alertness had softened slightly. As their truck disappeared around the corner, Nora stood in her empty shop and realized something had fundamentally changed. For 3 years, she had gone through the motions of helping people while keeping her heart safely locked away. But Emma's trust and Calder's desperate hope had slipped past her defenses like water through cracks in stone. For the first time since Thomas and Tommy died, she had someone counting on her for more than just professional competence. She had a little girl who needed healing and a father who needed hope, and somewhere deep in her chest, in a place that had been frozen for so long, she'd forgotten it existed. Something was beginning to thaw. That evening, Nora climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment above the shop, her mind still occupied with Emma's case. She moved through her solitary dinner routine, heating soup, eating at the small table by the window, washing her single bowl and spoon, but her thoughts kept returning to the little girl's description of twisted pain and the way hope had flickered in Calder's careful eyes. In her bedroom, she pulled an old wooden trunk from beneath the window. Inside, wrapped in faded cotton cloth, lay her grandmother's herbal journal, a leather-bound book filled with decades of careful observations, recipes and healing wisdom passed down through generations of mountain women. The pages were yellowed with age, some loose from frequent handling, filled with her grandmother's precise handwriting and small sketched illustrations of plants and preparation methods. She settled into the rocking chair that had been her mother's and opened the journal to the section on childhood illnesses. Her grandmother's voice seemed to whisper from the pages as Nora read familiar entries about digestive troubles, failure to thrive, and the mysterious ailments that sometimes plagued children whose bodies were trying to heal from trauma their minds couldn't process. One entry caught her attention. When the body holds pain that has no clear cause, look to the spirit as well as the flesh. Children especially carry wounds that manifest as physical symptoms when emotional healing is incomplete. Nora traced the faded ink with her finger, remembering her grandmother's patient voice, explaining how traditional healers understood the connection between emotional and physical wellness long before modern medicine acknowledged such links. Emma's symptoms, the digestive issues, the fatigue, the sense of something being twisted inside, could indeed be her body's way of processing experiences too overwhelming for her conscious mind. The next morning brought autumn's first real frost, painting the shop windows with delicate crystal patterns. Nora arrived early, wanting everything prepared before Emma and Calder returned. She brewed a fresh batch of the digestive tea, adding a small amount of lemon balm for its gentle, calming properties, and arranged the seating area to be more welcoming for a child who might need to rest. When the bell chimed at exactly 10 o'clock, Emma practically bounced through the door, her color already improved from the previous day. She carried a small backpack with her coloring books and crayons, and her eyes were brighter than Nora had yet seen them. The tea worked, Emma announced before Calder had fully closed the door behind them. "I ate 2 whole pieces of toast this morning, and my tummy didn't hurt even a little bit." Calder's expression was carefully controlled, but Nora caught the relief that flickered across his features before he schooled them back to neutrality. "She slept through the night for the first time in weeks," he said quietly. "No stomach pain, no restless tossing. That's wonderful," Nora said, meaning it completely. "But we need to be patient. One good night doesn't mean we're done. Real healing happens gradually." She prepared another cup of tea, while Emma settled into her chosen chair and began arranging her coloring supplies. The child moved with more energy today, but Nora noted she still favored her left side slightly, as if protecting her abdomen from sudden movements. "Emma, would you like to help me prepare your tea today?" Nora asked. "I think it's important for people to understand what they're putting in their bodies." The little girl nodded eagerly, abandoning her crayons to follow Nora to the preparation area. Calder remained in his chair, but watched every interaction with the focused attention of someone accustomed to assessing potential threats and advantages. "This is chamomile," Nora explained, letting Emma smell the dried flowers. "It's been helping people with stomach troubles for thousands of years. And this is ginger root. It settles nausea and helps your body absorb nutrients from food." Emma listened with the serious concentration of a much older child, asking thoughtful questions about where the plants grew and how they were dried and prepared. Her interest was genuine, not the polite attention children often showed adults, and Nora found herself enjoying the role of teacher in a way she hadn't since Tommy's death. "My first mommy used to make me tea when I was sick," Emma said suddenly, measuring dried herbs with careful precision. "I don't remember her very well, but I remember the smell of mint and how she would sing while she stirred it." The words created a moment of profound stillness. Calder's entire body tensed, his eyes fixed on his daughter with an expression of barely controlled pain. Nora sensed they were touching on territory that was both precious and dangerous, memories that Emma treasured but that caused Calder obvious distress. "That sounds like a beautiful memory," Nora said gently. "Your first mommy must have loved you very much to take such care when you weren't feeling well." "She did," Emma said matter-of-factly, apparently unaware of her father's tension. "Daddy says she's watching over us from heaven, and that's why he takes such good care of me now. Because she asked him to." The simple explanation hit Nora with unexpected force. She glanced at Calder and saw raw grief that mirrored her own, the pain of trying to be enough for a child who had lost too much. The weight of carrying someone else's love as well as your own. "Your daddy does take very good care of you," Nora said softly. "Anyone can see how much he loves you." Emma beamed up at Calder, completely secure in that love, despite whatever losses had shaped their small family. "He reads me stories every night and checks for monsters under my bed, even though I'm probably too old for monsters. And when I have bad dreams, he lets me sleep in his bed until they go away." Calder's throat worked as he swallowed hard. "Emma gets nightmares sometimes," he said roughly, "about things she doesn't remember clearly, but that still scare her. Trauma can hide in our bodies and minds," Nora said carefully, pouring hot water over the prepared herbs. "Sometimes healing the physical symptoms helps the emotional healing too." They settled back into their chairs with the fresh tea, falling into a comfortable rhythm of quiet conversation and shared silence. Emma colored intricate pictures of flowers and animals while sipping her remedy, occasionally showing her artwork to the adults or asking Nora about different plants in the shop. Calder gradually relaxed as the morning progressed, his vigilant posture easing into something more natural. When Emma became absorbed in her coloring, he leaned forward slightly and spoke to Nora in a voice too low for the child to overhear. "She hasn't mentioned her mother in months," he said. "I was starting to worry she was forgetting Sarah entirely." Sarah. So the first mother had a name, and Calder spoke it with the careful reverence of someone trying to keep a memory alive while managing his own grief. Nora understood that particular balance, honoring the dead while trying to create space for the living to heal. "Children remember what they need to remember," she said quietly. "Sometimes being in a place that feels safe allows memories to surface that were too painful before." Calder's eyes met hers with startling intensity. "Is that what this place is for you, safe?" The question caught her off guard. She looked around her shop, at the familiar shelves and comfortable chairs, the wood stove crackling softly in the corner, the gentle light filtering through windows she'd cleaned every week for 3 years. Was it safe? Or was it simply familiar, a cocoon of routine that protected her from having to risk anything real? "I thought it was," she said honestly. "But now I'm not so sure." Something shifted in Calder's expression, a recognition that suggested he understood exactly what she meant. They were both people who had constructed careful boundaries around their wounded hearts, who had found ways to function while keeping the most vulnerable parts of themselves protected. But Emma's presence was changing that calculus for both of them. "Daddy, look." Emma held up her latest creation, a detailed drawing of a garden filled with flowers in impossible colors. "This is Ms. Nora's greenhouse, except I made it magical, see? The plants glow because they have healing powers." The drawing was remarkably detailed for a child her age, showing both artistic talent and the kind of careful observation that suggested intelligence far beyond her years. But it was the way she'd interpreted the greenhouse that made Nora's breath catch, as a place of wonder and possibility, where ordinary things became extraordinary through care and attention. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," Nora said, accepting the picture with hands that trembled slightly. "May I keep it?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "I want to draw your whole shop. All the bottles and plants and the pretty jars with the ribbons on them. Maybe I could make you a whole book of pictures." The enthusiasm in her voice was infectious, and Nora found herself smiling more genuinely than she had in years. "I would treasure a book like that." As the morning stretched toward afternoon, Emma's energy began to flag slightly. But instead of the sudden crash Calder described as typical, her fatigue came gradually, like a normal child who had been active and engaged. She curled up in her chair with her comfort blanket, continuing to color but with slower, more thoughtful movements. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Nora asked. "Tired, but not the bad tired," Emma said, considering her words carefully. "Usually when I get tired, it feels like something heavy is sitting on my chest, and I can't breathe right. But now it just feels like I want to rest a little bit." "That's exactly what we want," Nora said, relief flooding through her. "Your body is using its energy to heal instead of fighting whatever was making you sick." Calder leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since Nora had met him, his expression approached something like peace. I can't remember the last time she described feeling tired instead of exhausted. They agreed to continue the tea treatment twice daily, with Emma and Calder returning to the shop each morning for a fresh supply and monitoring. As they prepared to leave, Emma carefully packed her coloring supplies, but left her newest drawing on Nora's counter. "For your wall," she explained. "So when other sick kids come here, they can see that this is a place where healing happens." The simple gesture nearly undid Nora completely. She knelt down and pulled Emma into a hug that felt as natural as breathing, marveling at how quickly this child had found her way past defenses that had held firm for 3 years. "Thank you," she whispered into Emma's hair, "for trusting me to help." "Thank you for listening to me," Emma whispered back. "And for making tea that tastes like hugs." When they were gone, Nora stood alone in her shop holding Emma's drawing and feeling as if the world had shifted around her. The careful routine that had sustained her grief was cracking open, letting in complications she wasn't sure she was ready to handle. But as she pinned the drawing to the wall behind her counter, right where other patients would see it, first thing when they entered, she realized something important had already been decided. Whatever came next, she was no longer just going through the motions of healing others while keeping her own heart safely locked away. Emma and Calder had found the key to that lock, and there was no going back now. That evening, Nora climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment above the shop, her mind still occupied with Emma's case. She moved through her solitary dinner routine, heating soup, eating at the small table by the window, washing her single bowl and spoon. But her thoughts kept returning to the little girl's description of twisted pain and the way hope had flickered in Calder's careful eyes. In her bedroom, she pulled an old wooden trunk from beneath the window. Inside, wrapped in faded cotton cloth, lay her grandmother's herbal journal, a leather-bound book filled with decades of careful observations, recipes and healing wisdom passed down through generations of mountain women. The pages were yellowed with age, some loose from frequent handling, filled with her grandmother's precise handwriting, and small sketched illustrations of plants and preparation methods. She settled into the rocking chair that had been her mother's and opened the journal to the section on childhood illnesses. Her grandmother's voice seemed to whisper from the pages as Nora read familiar entries about digestive troubles, failure to thrive, and the mysterious ailments that sometimes plagued children whose bodies were trying to heal from trauma. their minds couldn't process. One entry caught her attention. When the body holds pain that has no clear cause, look to the spirit as well as the flesh. Children especially carry wounds that manifest as physical symptoms when emotional healing is incomplete. Nora traced the faded ink with her finger, remembering her grandmother's patient voice explaining how traditional healers understood the connection between emotional and physical wellness long before modern medicine acknowledged such links. Emma's symptoms, the digestive issues, the fatigue, the sense of something being twisted inside, could indeed be her body's way of processing experiences too overwhelming for her conscious mind. The next morning brought autumn's first real frost, painting the shop windows with delicate crystal patterns. Nora arrived early, wanting everything prepared before Emma and Calder returned. She brewed a fresh batch of the digestive tea, adding a small amount of lemon balm for its gentle calming properties, and arranged the seating area to be more welcoming for a child who might need to rest. When the bell chimed at exactly 10 o'clock, Emma practically bounced through the door, her color already improved from the previous day. She carried a small backpack with her coloring books and crayons, and her eyes were brighter than Nora had yet seen them. The tea worked, Emma announced before Calder had fully closed the door behind them. I ate 2 whole pieces of toast this morning, and my tummy didn't hurt even a little bit. Calder's expression was carefully controlled, but Nora caught the relief that flickered across his features before he schooled them back to neutrality. She slept through the night for the first time in weeks, he said quietly. No stomach pain, no restless tossing. That's wonderful, Nora said, meaning it completely. But we need to be patient. One good night doesn't mean we're done. Real healing happens gradually. She prepared another cup of tea while Emma settled into her chosen chair and began arranging her coloring supplies. The child moved with more energy today, but Nora noted she still favored her left side slightly, as if protecting her abdomen from sudden movements. Emma, would you like to help me prepare your tea today? Nora asked. I think it's important for people to understand what they're putting in their bodies. The little girl nodded eagerly, abandoning her crayons to follow Nora to the preparation area. Calder remained in his chair, but watched every interaction with the focused attention of someone accustomed to assessing potential threats and advantages. This is chamomile, Nora explained, letting Emma smell the dried flowers. It's been helping people with stomach troubles for thousands of years. And this is ginger root. It settles nausea and helps your body absorb nutrients from food. Emma listened with the serious concentration of a much older child, asking thoughtful questions about where the plants grew and how they were dried and prepared. Her interest was genuine, not the polite attention children often showed adults. And Nora found herself enjoying the role of teacher in a way she hadn't since Tommy's death. My first mommy used to make me tea when I was sick, Emma said suddenly, measuring dried herbs with careful precision. I don't remember her very well, but I remember the smell of mint and how she would sing while she stirred it. The words created a moment of profound stillness. Calder's entire body tensed, his eyes fixed on his daughter with an expression of barely controlled pain. Nora sensed they were touching on territory that was both precious and dangerous, memories that Emma treasured but that caused Calder obvious distress. That sounds like a beautiful memory, Nora said gently. Your first mommy must have loved you very much to take such care when you weren't feeling well. She did, Emma said matter-of-factly, apparently unaware of her father's tension. Daddy says she's watching over us from heaven, and that's why he takes such good care of me now. Because she asked him to. The simple explanation hit Nora with unexpected force. She glanced at Calder and saw raw grief that mirrored her own, the pain of trying to be enough for a child who had lost too much, the weight of carrying someone else's love as well as your own. Your daddy does take very good care of you, Nora said softly. Anyone can see how much he loves you. Emma beamed up at Calder, completely secure in that love, despite whatever losses had shaped their small family. He reads me stories every night and checks for monsters under my bed, even though I'm probably too old for monsters. And when I have bad dreams, he lets me sleep in his bed until they go away. Calder's throat worked as he swallowed hard. Emma gets nightmares sometimes, he said roughly, about things she doesn't remember clearly, but that still scare her. Trauma can hide in our bodies and minds, Nora said carefully, pouring hot water over the prepared herbs. Sometimes healing the physical symptoms helps the emotional healing too. They settled back into their chairs with the fresh tea, falling into a comfortable rhythm of quiet conversation and shared silence. Emma colored intricate pictures of flowers and animals while sipping her remedy, occasionally showing her artwork to the adults or asking Nora about different plants in the shop. Calder gradually relaxed as the morning progressed, his vigilant posture easing into something more natural. When Emma became absorbed in her coloring, he leaned forward slightly and spoke to Nora in a voice too low for the child to overhear. "She hasn't mentioned her mother in months," he said. "I was starting to worry she was forgetting Sarah entirely." Sarah. So the first mother had a name. And Calder spoke it with the careful reverence of someone trying to keep a memory alive while managing his own grief. Nora understood that particular balance, honoring the dead while trying to create space for the living to heal. "Children remember what they need to remember," she said quietly. "Sometimes being in a place that feels safe allows memories to surface that were too painful before." Calder's eyes met hers with startling intensity. "Is that what this place is for you, safe?" The question caught her off guard. She looked around her shop, at the familiar shelves and comfortable chairs, the wood stove crackling softly in the corner, the gentle light filtering through windows she'd cleaned every week for 3 years. Was it safe? Or was it simply familiar, a cocoon of routine that protected her from having to risk anything real? "I thought it was," she said honestly. "But now I'm not so sure." Something shifted in Calder's expression, a recognition that suggested he understood exactly what she meant. They were both people who had constructed careful boundaries around their wounded hearts, who had found ways to function while keeping the most vulnerable parts of themselves protected. But Emma's presence was changing that calculus for both of them. "Daddy, look!" Emma held up her latest creation, a detailed drawing of a garden filled with flowers in impossible colors. "This is Miss Nora's greenhouse, except I made it magical, see? The plants glow because they have healing powers." The drawing was remarkably detailed for a child her age, showing both artistic talent and the kind of careful observation that suggested intelligence far beyond her years. But it was the way she'd interpreted the greenhouse that made Nora's breath catch, as a place of wonder and possibility, where ordinary things became extraordinary through care and attention. "That's beautiful." "Sweetheart," Nora said, accepting the picture with hands that trembled slightly. "May I keep it?" Emma nodded enthusiastically. "I want to draw your whole shop. All the bottles and plants, and the pretty jars with the ribbons on them. Maybe I could make you a whole book of pictures." The enthusiasm in her voice was infectious, and Nora found herself smiling more genuinely than she had in years. "I would treasure a book like that." As the morning stretched toward afternoon, Emma's energy began to flag slightly, but instead of the sudden crash Calder described as typical, her fatigue came gradually, like a normal child who had been active and engaged. She curled up in her chair with her comfort blanket, continuing to color, but with slower, more thoughtful movements. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" Nora asked. "Tired, but not the bad tired," Emma said, considering her words carefully. "Usually when I get tired, it feels like something heavy is sitting on my chest and I can't breathe right. But now, it just feels like I want to rest a little bit." "That's exactly what we want," Nora said, relief flooding through her. "Your body is using its energy to heal instead of fighting whatever was making you sick." Calder leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since Nora had met him, his expression approached something like peace. "I can't remember the last time she described feeling tired instead of exhausted." They agreed to continue the tea treatment twice daily, with Emma and Calder returning to the shop each morning for a fresh supply and monitoring. As they prepared to leave, Emma carefully packed her coloring supplies, but left her newest drawing on Nora's counter. For your wall, she explained. So when other sick kids come here, they can see that this is a place where healing happens. The simple gesture nearly undid Nora completely. She knelt down and pulled Emma into a hug that felt as natural as breathing, marveling at how quickly this child had found her way past defenses that had held firm for 3 years. "Thank you," she whispered into Emma's hair, "for trusting me to help." "Thank you for listening to me," Emma whispered back, "and for making tea that tastes like hugs." When they were gone, Nora stood alone in her shop, holding Emma's drawing and feeling as if the world had shifted around her. The careful routine that had sustained her grief was cracking open, letting in complications she wasn't sure she was ready to handle. But as she pinned the drawing to the wall behind her counter, right where other patients would see it first thing when they entered, she realized something important had already been decided. Whatever came next, she was no longer just going through the motions of healing others while keeping her own heart safely locked away. Emma and Calder had found the key to that lock, and there was no going back now. Sunday arrived with the crisp clarity of autumn in the mountains, the kind of day that made every color more vivid and every breath taste of pine and possibility. Nora spent longer than usual choosing her clothes, settling finally on a soft blue sweater that Thomas had always said brought out her eyes, and jeans that were nice enough for dinner but practical enough for whatever Emma might have planned. She drove up the winding mountain road following Calder's directions, her nerves alternating between excitement and panic. It had been 3 years since she'd been anyone's dinner guest. 3 years since she'd had to navigate the social complexities of being part of someone else's evening routine. The cabin appeared around a bend, in the road like something from a storybook, weathered log walls, a stone chimney sending up a thin stream of smoke, windows glowing warmly in the gathering dusk. Calder's truck sat in the gravel driveway next to a neat pile of split firewood, and Emma's bicycle leaned against the front porch steps. Before Nora could knock, the front door burst open, and Emma launched herself into a welcoming hug, chattering excitedly about everything she wanted to show her guest. "Miss Nora, you came. I made place cards for dinner, and I picked flowers for the table. And Daddy let me help make the sauce, and wait until you see my room. I arranged all my stuffed animals so they could meet you." Calder appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a dish towel, his hair slightly mussed from cooking. He'd traded his usual careful alertness for something more relaxed, though Nora noticed his eyes still automatically scanned the road behind her car before settling on her face. "Welcome to our home," he said simply. And something in the way he said "our home" made her chest tighten with warmth. The cabin's interior was cozy but masculine, furnished with sturdy wooden pieces that showed the kind of craftsmanship that came from skilled hands and attention to detail. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, and the air was rich with the smell of tomato sauce and garlic bread. But what struck Nora most was how the space had been adapted for Emma. Colorful drawings taped to the refrigerator, a small reading nook created in the corner with child-sized furniture, toys organized in baskets that clearly had designated homes. "Daddy made most of the furniture himself," Emma announced proudly, leading Nora on a tour of the main room. "He says working with wood helps him think. And also, we couldn't afford to buy everything new when we moved here." Emma, Calder warned gently, but she continued undaunted. "It's okay, Daddy. Miss Nora knows we don't have lots of money because you told her we're starting over. But look how nice everything is anyway." She gestured around the room with the satisfaction of someone showing off a palace, and Nora realized that Emma's pride wasn't about the quality of their possessions, but about the love and care that had gone into creating their home. Every piece of furniture, every arranged space, every small comfort spoke of a father who had worked hard to give his daughter stability and beauty, even when resources were limited. In the kitchen, Nora found evidence of Calder's military precision applied to domestic life. Spices were arranged alphabetically, cooking utensils hung in precise order, and dinner preparations had been executed with the kind of planning that left nothing to chance. But Emma's influence was everywhere too. Handmade potholders, a child's step stool positioned perfectly for helping with meal prep, and a small wooden bird that Nora recognized from Emma's descriptions as a treasure from her first mommy. The wooden bird sat on a shelf where Emma could see it easily, carved from what looked like pine, painted in soft blues and greens that had faded with age and handling. It was clearly a child's toy, worn smooth in places where small fingers had rubbed it during moments of comfort or anxiety. "That's my remembering bird," Emma explained, following Nora's gaze. "Daddy says my first mommy made it for me when I was little, before she got too sick to make things anymore. When I feel sad or scared, I hold it and remember that she loved me enough to make something that would last forever." Calder's hands stilled on the pasta he was stirring, his shoulders tightening slightly. Nora sensed they were approaching another piece of the complicated history that had brought this unlikely family together. "It's beautiful," she said gently. "Your first mommy must have been very talented." "She was an artist," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Daddy has some of her paintings in his room, but he only looks at them when he thinks I'm asleep. I think they make him sad-happy, like my remembering bird makes me sad-happy." The phrase captured something essential about grief that most adults struggled to articulate: the way love and loss could coexist in the same moment. The way healing meant learning to hold joy and sorrow simultaneously rather than choosing one over the other. Dinner was a revelation in comfortable domesticity. Emma had indeed set the table with napkins folded into precise triangles, and she'd arranged wildflowers in a mason jar centerpiece with the kind of artistic eye that suggested she'd inherited her first mother's creative gifts. Calder served spaghetti with homemade sauce and garlic bread, and Emma provided running commentary on everything from the proper way to twirl pasta to her plans for planting a garden in the spring. "Daddy says we can have vegetables, and maybe some flowers too," she said, expertly managing her spaghetti with the confidence of someone who'd been eating with adult utensils since she was very small. "I want to grow the plants that go in your teas, so if other sick kids come to visit, we can help you help them." The casual assumption that she and Calder would be part of Nora's healing work in the long term was both touching and terrifying. Emma spoke as if their integration into Nora's life was a settled fact, requiring only the working out of practical details. "That sounds like a wonderful idea," Nora said carefully, "though we'd want to make sure we choose plants that will grow well at this elevation." "Daddy knows about growing things," Emma said confidently. "He had a big garden at our old house before we had to move. He grew tomatoes as big as my head and green beans that were longer than my arm." Another glimpse into their previous life, offered casually by Emma, but clearly causing Calder discomfort. Nora was beginning to understand that their move to Cedar Falls hadn't been entirely voluntary, that whatever had brought them here had involved leaving behind more than just a house and garden. After dinner, Emma insisted on showing Nora her bedroom, a small space under the eaves that Calder had transformed into a perfect child's sanctuary. The walls were painted a soft lavender, and handmade shelves held books, stuffed animals, and art supplies in careful organization. A quilt covered the narrow bed, clearly handmade, with a pattern of interlocking rings in blues and greens that reminded Nora of her own grandmother's work. "Daddy made the quilt too," Emma said, settling onto the bed and patting the space beside her. "He learned how when I got sick because I was cold all the time and regular blankets weren't warm enough. It took him forever because his hands are too big for the tiny stitches. But he said love makes your hands work better." Nora sat beside Emma, running her fingers over the precise stitching that spoke of hours of patient work done by a man learning a completely new skill for the sole purpose of keeping his daughter warm. The image of Calder bent over quilting squares, his large soldier's hands carefully manipulating needle and thread, was almost unbearably moving. "He must love you very much," she said softly. "He does," Emma said with complete confidence. "And I love him too. But you know what? What? I think there's enough love in our family for one more person. If the right person wanted to be part of it, The statement was delivered with Emma's characteristic directness, but her eyes watched Nora's face carefully, looking for a reaction. This 8-year-old was far more aware of the undercurrents between the adults than either Calder or Nora had realized. "Emma," Nora said gently, "what makes you think I might want to be part of your family?" Emma considered the question with her usual seriousness. "Lots of things. Like how you smile different when Daddy's in the room, not your polite smile, but your real one. And how Daddy stands straighter when he's talking to you, like he wants to be the best version of himself. And how when the three of us are together, it feels like puzzle pieces that were supposed to fit but got lost for a while and finally found each other again." The perceptiveness of the observation left Nora speechless. How did you explain to a child that adults were often afraid of puzzle pieces fitting too well? That sometimes the very thing you wanted most was also the thing that terrified you beyond reason? Sometimes grown-ups need more time to figure out their feelings, she said finally. "I know," Emma said patiently. "Daddy explained that to me. But I also know that sometimes, when you wait too long to decide about something good, it goes away and doesn't come back. And you seem like the kind of good that might not come back if we let it go away." From the mouth of babes, Nora thought again. Emma had articulated the fear that neither adult had been willing to voice, that this fragile connection they were building was precious precisely because it was rare, and that hesitating too long might mean losing it entirely. When they returned to the main room, they found Calder building up the fire for the evening, his movements economical and practiced. He changed into a soft flannel shirt, and his hair had fallen across his forehead in a way that made him look younger and less guarded than usual. "Everything meet with your approval?" he asked Emma, clearly referring to more than just the bedroom tour. "Miss Nora likes my quilt," Emma reported. "And I told her about our garden plans. And we talked about feelings and puzzle pieces and how sometimes good things need you to be brave enough to keep them." Calder's eyes met Nora's over Emma's head, and she saw her own mixture of hope and uncertainty reflected there. Whatever Emma had said upstairs, it had apparently been direct enough to eliminate any pretense about what was happening between them. They spent the rest of the evening in comfortable domesticity, Emma showing Nora her favorite books, Calder teaching her a card game he'd learned in the army, all three of them sharing stories and laughter in front of the crackling fire. As the evening wound down, Nora found herself reluctant to leave this warm circle of belonging. This glimpse of what family could look like when built on choice rather than just circumstance. When it finally came time to go, Emma hugged her with the fierce intensity of someone making a claim. "This was the best Sunday dinner ever," she whispered. "Will you come back next week?" "If you'll have me," Nora said, meaning it completely. "We'll have you," Calder said quietly, "for as long as you want to keep coming back." Driving home through the mountain darkness, Nora felt as if she were carrying something precious and fragile. The possibility of love, the promise of family, the terrifying and wonderful prospect of allowing herself to belong somewhere again. The storm arrived on a Tuesday night in late October, bringing with it the kind of wind that spoke of winter's approach and the fragility of the structures humans built against nature's power. Nora woke to the sound of something large crashing in her backyard, followed by the distinct crack of breaking glass. She pulled on her robe and boots, grabbing a flashlight to assess the damage. What she found in the beam of her light made her heart sink. A massive pine branch had fallen across her greenhouse, crushing the glass panels on the south side and destroying months of carefully tended plants. The greenhouse had been her sanctuary, the place where she felt most connected to the healing work that gave her life meaning. Now seedlings lay scattered among shards of glass, their roots exposed to the cold air, their future uncertain. She stood in her backyard in the pre-dawn darkness, overwhelmed by the sudden loss of something she'd taken for granted. By the time the sun rose, the full extent of the damage was clear. The greenhouse was beyond simple repair. The entire south wall would need to be rebuilt, new glass panels installed, the growing beds reconstructed. It was the kind of project that would require expertise she didn't have and money she wasn't sure she could spare. She was still standing among the wreckage when Calder's truck pulled into her driveway. Emma in the passenger seat, with her usual morning enthusiasm completely absent. Instead, the little girl looked worried, pressing her face to the window to get a better view of the destruction. "Nora," Calder said, approaching with the careful attention of someone assessing a crisis. "Are you hurt?" "No, just—" She gestured helplessly at the ruined structure. "This is where I grow most of the plants for Emma's remedies. The chamomile, the ginger, the fennel. It'll take months to rebuild, and even longer to get new plants established." Emma climbed out of the truck and walked carefully among the debris, her face solemn, with the kind of seriousness she showed when something truly important was at stake. "Can we fix it?" she asked quietly. "I don't know, sweetheart. It's going to be expensive and complicated, and we can fix it," Calder said firmly, cutting off her catalogue of obstacles. "Emma, can you go gather any plants that might be saved? Gently, and watch out for the glass." As Emma began her rescue mission with the focused concentration she brought to all important tasks, Calder walked the perimeter of the damaged greenhouse with the methodical assessment of someone who understood construction and problem-solving. "The frame is solid," he said, running his hands over the metal supports. "We'll need new glass panels for this whole section, and some of the growing benches will have to be rebuilt, but the foundation is good. With the right materials and a couple of weeks of work, we can make this better than it was before. Calder, I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering." His voice carried the same quiet determination she'd heard when he'd first brought Emma for treatment. "This greenhouse keeps my daughter healthy. That makes it my responsibility too." The simple declaration shifted something fundamental between them. He wasn't helping out of charity or neighborly obligation, but because he'd claimed a stake in her well-being, just as she'd claimed one in Emma's. They were no longer separate people who happened to care about the same child. They were becoming a unit that shared responsibilities and protected what mattered to all of them. Emma appeared with an armful of salvageable plants, her face streaked with dirt but brightening with hope. "I found lots that aren't too hurt," she announced. "And look!" She held up a small pot containing a chamomile plant that had somehow survived the chaos completely intact. This one didn't even lose any flowers. It's like it knew how important it was. "Plants are tougher than they look," Nora said, accepting the rescued chamomile with hands that trembled slightly. "Sometimes damage makes them grow back stronger. Like people," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Daddy says that's why we moved here, so the broken parts of us could grow back stronger in a safe place." It was the most direct reference Emma had made to whatever trauma had shaped their past, and both adults felt the weight of the confession. This child understood healing in ways that went far beyond her years, because she'd had to learn those lessons herself. Over the following days, Calder threw himself into the greenhouse restoration with the focused intensity of a mission. He arrived each morning with tools and materials, working methodically through the reconstruction, while Emma helped where she could, and Nora tried to balance her shop duties. With the emotional complexity of having someone remake such an important part of her life, watching him work was both comforting and unsettling. His competence was obvious. The way he measured twice and cut once, how he planned each step before beginning, the precision with which he fitted new glass panels into their frames. But there was also something almost desperate in his focus, as if the physical act of building was the only way he knew to express feelings that were too complicated for words. "You don't have to do all this," Nora said on the third day, when she found him working by lamplight after Emma had gone to sleep in the cabin. "Yes, I do," he said, without looking up from the growing bench he was assembling. "This place, what you do here, it saved Emma's life. It gave us both something we didn't know we needed. You're talking about more than just the herbal treatments." He set down his screwdriver and looked at her directly, his face serious in the warm light. "Emma's been sick with more than just digestive problems. She's been sick with grief, with displacement, with the fear that comes from losing everything you thought was permanent. What you've given her isn't just medicine, it's belonging, safety, the chance to be a kid again. And what about you?" The question slipped out before Nora could stop it. "What has this place given you?" Calder was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Hope! For the first time in 3 years, I can imagine a future that isn't just about survival." The admission hung between them like a bridge. Neither of them was sure they were ready to cross. But as they stood in the half-rebuilt greenhouse, surrounded by the smell of fresh wood and new possibilities, Nora felt something shift inside her chest. Not the familiar clench of grief, but its opposite. The slow, tentative unfurling of a heart learning to trust again. "Calder," she said softly, "what happened to you both? What made you have to start over?" His hands stilled on the wood he was sanding, and for a moment she thought he would retreat behind his usual careful silence. But then he set down his tools and leaned against the workbench, his shoulders carrying the weight of memories he rarely allowed himself to examine. Sarah, Emma's first mother, died of cancer when Emma was 5. They'd been on their own since Emma was born, and Sarah had no family, no support system. When the state was looking for placement, they asked if I'd consider taking her. "You knew Sarah?" "I was deployed with her brother Jake, best soldier I ever served with, and my closest friend. He died in an ED explosion 2 months before Sarah got sick. She wrote to me, told me about Emma, asked if I'd watch out for them if anything happened to her. The pieces of their story were falling into place, painting a picture of loss layered upon loss, of promises made to the dying and kept at enormous personal cost. So you adopted Emma, unofficially at first. The system moves slowly, and Emma needed stability immediately. But yes, eventually the adoption went through. She became my daughter in every way that matters, and you've been taking care of her ever since. Trying to." His voice carried the exhaustion of someone who'd been carrying a heavy load alone for too long. "But single parenthood is hard enough without the complications we had to deal with." "What kind of complications?" Another long pause. "The kind that make it necessary to change your name, leave everything behind, and start over in a place where nobody knows your history." The carefully neutral words carried undertones that made Nora's stomach tighten with alarm. Whatever had driven Calder and Emma to Cedar Falls, it involved more than just grief and the need for a fresh start. They were running from something specific, something dangerous enough to require complete reinvention. "Are you safe here?" she asked quietly. "As safe as we can be anywhere." He resumed sanding, his movements controlled but tense. "I've taken precautions, made sure we can't be easily tracked. But Emma deserves a normal life, and I'm trying to give her that without putting her at risk. And me?" The question came out more vulnerable than she'd intended. "Am I at risk by being part of your lives?" Calder stopped working entirely, his attention focused completely on her face. "I would never knowingly put you in danger, Nora. If I thought there was any real threat to you or to Emma, we'd leave tonight. But you can't know for certain." "No," he admitted. "I can't know for certain, which is why I need you to understand what you're getting into if you choose to stay involved with us. We're not just a single father and his daughter looking for a quiet life. We're people with complicated histories and enemies who might someday come looking for us." The honesty was brutal and necessary, forcing Nora to confront the reality that love sometimes came with costs that went beyond emotional vulnerability. Choosing Calder and Emma might mean choosing a life that included elements of danger she'd never had to consider. But as she looked around the greenhouse, he was rebuilding with his own hands. At the evidence of his devotion to Emma's well-being and his commitment to creating something beautiful and lasting in their lives, she realized the choice had already been made, not by her rational mind, which was busy cataloguing risks and calculating probabilities, but by her heart, which had recognized something worth protecting the first time Emma had trusted her with her pain. "Then we'd better make sure they never find you," she said quietly. The smile that transformed Calder's face was worth every risk she might be taking. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides, cupping her face in his work-roughened hands with a gentleness that made her breath catch. "Nora," he said, her name a prayer and a promise, "I never expected to find someone like you, someone like me." Someone brave enough to love a broken soldier and his sick little girl. Someone strong enough to take on our complications and patient enough to help us heal. She reached up to cover his hands with her own, marveling at how natural the gesture felt. Maybe I'm the one who needed healing. Maybe you and Emma are teaching me how to live again. When he kissed her, it was with the careful reverence of someone who understood the preciousness of second chances. And when Emma's sleepy voice called from the cabin asking if they were coming in soon, they broke apart, laughing, their foreheads touching as they shared the sweet awkwardness of new love, interrupted by the practical demands of parenting. "We should go," Nora said, but made no move to step away from his warmth. "We should," Calder agreed. But his arms tightened around her instead. From the cabin came Emma's voice again, more insistent now. "Daddy!" "Miss Nora, I made hot chocolate and it's getting cold." They walked toward the cabin together, their hands intertwined, the damaged greenhouse standing behind them like evidence of their commitment to rebuilding what storms had torn apart. In the warm light spilling from the windows, they could see Emma's silhouette moving around the kitchen, preparing comfort for the adults who were learning to comfort each other. And in that moment, Nora understood that love wasn't about avoiding storms. It was about choosing the people you wanted to weather them with, and trusting that what you built together would be strong enough to survive whatever came next. 3 weeks after the greenhouse was completed, Nora arrived at the shop to find her front door slightly ajar. She always locked it carefully each evening, a habit ingrained by years of living alone, and the sight of the open entrance sent ice through her veins. She approached cautiously, her phone already in her hand with Calder's number pulled up. The shop appeared untouched at first glance, but as she moved through the familiar space, small details felt wrong. Books weren't quite aligned on their shelves. Herb jars had been moved fractionally from their usual positions. Someone had been here, searching through her things, with enough skill to avoid obvious detection, but not enough care to hide their presence entirely. Her blood chilled when she realized what was missing. Emma's medical file, which she kept locked in her desk drawer, along with her treatment notes and progress documentation. Whoever had broken in wasn't interested in money or valuable herbs. They'd been specifically looking for information about Emma. Nora's hand shook as she dialed Calder's number, her mind racing through possibilities she didn't want to consider. The call went straight to voicemail, which was unusual. Calder always answered immediately when she called, hypervigilant about anything that might concern Emma's well-being. She tried again, with the same result. Then she called the cabin's landline, a number Calder had given her for emergencies. It rang endlessly with no answer. Fear crystallizing into panic, Nora locked the shop and drove toward the mountain cabin, her imagination conjuring scenarios each more terrible than the last. What if whoever had searched her shop had gone to the cabin first? What if Calder's careful precautions hadn't been enough? What if she was already too late? The cabin appeared normal as she approached. Calder's truck in the driveway, smoke rising from the chimney, no obvious signs of disturbance. But when she knocked on the front door, it was Emma who answered instead of Calder, her face pale and her eyes wide with the kind of fear that made her look far older than her 8 years. "Ms. Nora!" Emma threw herself into Nora's arms with desperate relief. "Daddy said you might come, but I wasn't sure, and I was scared to call anyone, because he said not to use the phone unless it was a real emergency. But maybe this is a real emergency, and I don't know what to do." The words tumbled out in a rush that spoke of hours spent in anxious uncertainty. Nora held the trembling child close, her own fear spiking as she looked past Emma into the cabin's interior. "Where's your daddy, sweetheart?" "He's in his room with papers everywhere, and he keeps saying bad words under his breath and packing things in bags, like we might have to leave really fast." Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. "I think the scary people found us." Nora's blood turned to ice water. "Oh, what scary people?" Before Emma could answer, Calder appeared in the hallway, his face grim with the kind of controlled tension she'd never seen from him before. He moved with the precise economy of someone in crisis mode, every gesture purposeful and alert. "You shouldn't be here," he said without preamble. It's not safe. Someone broke into my shop, Nora said, keeping her voice level despite the fear clawing at her chest. They took Emma's medical file. Calder's face went white. When? Sometime last night. Everything else was left alone. They were specifically looking for information about Emma. Daddy? Emma said in a small voice. What's happening? Calder looked between the two people who had become his world, his internal struggle visible in the tension around his eyes. Finally, he seemed to come to a decision. Sit down, he said heavily. Both of you. It's time you knew the truth. They settled on the couch in front of the fire, Emma curled between them like she was trying to make herself as small as possible. Calder ran his hands through his hair, gathering his thoughts or maybe his courage. My real name isn't Calder Voss, he began. It's Marcus Wade. I was a Navy SEAL, not regular Army. And Emma isn't Sarah's biological daughter. The words hit like physical blows. Everything Nora thought she knew about their history was crumbling, replaced by something much more complicated and dangerous. 3 years ago, my team was sent to extract a deep-cover CIA operative from a cartel compound in Colombia. The operation went bad. We'd been betrayed by someone in our chain of command. My entire team was killed except for me. Emma had gone very still, her small hand finding Nora's and gripping tight. Clearly, this was not the first time she'd heard parts of this story. The operative we were supposed to extract was Sarah Coleman, and she'd been undercover for 2 years, trying to gather intelligence on a human trafficking network. When we found her, she was dying from injuries sustained during interrogation. But she wasn't alone. Calder's voice grew rough with emotion. Emma was there. 5 years old, scared out of her mind, speaking no English. She'd been taken from her family in Guatemala and was being held for transport to buyers in the US. Sarah had been trying to protect her, claiming Emma was her own daughter to keep the traffickers from shipping her north. The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Nora felt sick, trying to process the magnitude of what Calder was revealing. Emma wasn't his adopted daughter or even Sarah's biological child. She was a victim of human trafficking that he'd rescued during a classified military operation. Sarah made me promise to get Emma out, Calder continued, to keep her safe, give her a real life, make sure she never had to be afraid again. She died in my arms 20 minutes before the extraction helicopter arrived. So you brought Emma back to the US, Nora said quietly. It wasn't that simple. Officially, the mission never happened. The government couldn't acknowledge a failed CIA operation, especially one that had been compromised from within. Emma didn't exist in any system. No birth certificate, no documentation, no legal identity. Emma's grip on Nora's hand tightened. Daddy had to make me a new name and a new birthday and a whole new story so I could be safe, she said in a whisper. He taught me English and how to be an American girl, and he said if I was very good and very careful, the bad people would never find me. I created false documentation, Calder said. Made Emma my legally adopted daughter, gave us both new identities. For 3 years it worked. We had a normal life in Colorado. I did furniture making, Emma went to school, we were just a regular family. What changed? Nora asked, though she was beginning to understand. Someone started asking questions, making inquiries about a Navy SEAL named Marcus Wade, who disappeared after a classified mission. Then Emma got sick, and the medical tests, the insurance claims, the paper trail, it created visibility we couldn't afford. So you ran. We disappeared. Again. Created new identities. Came to Cedar Falls because it's remote, and most people here mind their own business. I thought we were safe. Emma looked up at Nora with eyes that held far too much knowledge for a child. I'm not really Emma Voss, she said sadly. I don't remember my real name from before. The bad people called me different things, and then Sarah called me Emma because she said it meant whole, and she wanted me to be whole again. Daddy kept the name because it was the only part of Sarah I had left. The devastating simplicity of Emma's explanation broke Nora's heart completely. This child had lost everything. her family, her name, her language, her very identity, and had been rebuilt piece by piece through the love of a dying CIA operative and a soldier who'd promised to keep her safe. The people who broke into your shop, Calder continued, they're either working for whoever betrayed my team originally, or they're connected to the trafficking network that Sarah was investigating. Either way, they want Emma back and they want me dead. But why now? Nora asked. After 3 years, Emma's illness brought us into the medical system. Even with false identities, there are patterns, facial recognition software, ways to track people who are trying to stay hidden. Someone connected the dots. Emma pulled her comfort blanket tighter around her shoulders, not the faded pink one Nora had first seen, she realized now, but a different one entirely. Everything about their story was layers upon layers of careful construction, truth mixed with necessity, love built on a foundation of secrets. What happens now? Nora asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. We run, Calder said simply. Tonight. I have contingency plans, safe houses, resources they don't know about. We can disappear again. For how long? As long as it takes. Maybe forever. The words hit Emma like physical blows. But what about Ms. Nora? She cried. What about my tea and my pictures on the wall? And Sunday dinners and the garden we were going to plant? Sweetheart, Calder said gently, we can't put Ms. Nora in danger. The people looking for us, they'll hurt anyone they think is helping us. But I don't want to leave. Emma's voice rose to the edge of hysteria. I'm tired of running and being scared and having to remember which name to use and which story to tell. I want to stay here where people know me and care about me and where I'm not sick anymore. The anguish in her voice was unbearable. This child had finally found safety and belonging, only to have it ripped away by forces completely beyond her control. Nora watched Emma's small frame shake with sobs and felt something fierce and protective roar to life inside her chest. What if you didn't run? She heard herself asking. Calder's head snapped up. What? What if instead of running we made a stand? What if we used the fact that they've found you to end this once and for all? Nora, these aren't people you negotiate with. They're killers, professional ones. But you're a professional too. And this is your home ground now. You know these mountains, these people, the terrain. You have advantages here that you wouldn't have anywhere else. Calder stared at her as if she'd lost her mind. You're talking about putting yourself in danger. Putting Emma in danger. Putting the whole town at risk. I'm talking about finally stopping the running. Nora turned to Emma, whose tears had slowed as she listened to the conversation. Sweetheart, what do you want to do? I want to stay, Emma said immediately. I want to fight the bad people so they can't hurt other kids like they hurt me. I want to be brave like Daddy taught me. Emma, no, Calder said firmly. This isn't a decision for a child to make. Yes, it is, Nora said quietly. She's the one who's been running. She's the one who's been living in fear. She has the right to choose whether she keeps running or makes a stand. And what happens when these people show up with military-grade weapons and professional training? What happens when they start shooting? Then we make sure we're ready for them. Nora's voice was steady, but inside she was terrified by her own words. You said yourself that you have skills, resources, advantages. Use them. Calder was quiet for a long moment, his mind clearly racing through possibilities and probabilities. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a different quality, not the desperate fear of a man protecting his child, but the tactical assessment of a trained operative considering his options. It would be incredibly dangerous, he said slowly, and it would mean involving other people, people who don't deserve to be caught up in our war. What if they volunteered? Nora asked. What if you told them the truth and let them choose? You don't understand what you're asking. I understand that Emma deserves a chance to have a real life in a real home with people who love her. I understand that you deserve to stop looking over your shoulder every moment of every day. And I understand that sometimes the only way to be truly safe is to eliminate the threat entirely. Emma had stopped crying. Listening to the adults discuss her future with the focused intensity she brought to all important matters. When both Calder and Nora looked at her, waiting for her input, she straightened her small shoulders with visible determination. "Daddy," she said clearly, "you taught me that running away doesn't solve problems. It just makes them follow you wherever you go. You said the only way to stop a bully is to stand up to them. This is different, Em. These aren't playground bullies." "No," she agreed. "They're worse. They hurt kids and they killed your friends and they made us live like scared rabbits for 3 whole years. Don't you think it's time to stop being scared?" The wisdom and courage in her words left both adults speechless. This child, who had every reason to choose safety and hiding, was instead choosing to fight for the right to belong somewhere. "If we do this," Calder said slowly, "there's no going back. Win or lose, everything changes." "Everything's already changed," Emma pointed out practically. "They found us, which means we can't stay here safely, and we can't run safely either. So we might as well try to win." Nora reached over and took Calder's hand, feeling the tension and conflict in his grip. "You don't have to decide tonight," she said gently. "But you don't have to face this alone anymore either. Whatever you choose, Emma's right. We're in this together now." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin windows and sending sparks up the chimney. Somewhere in the darkness, people who meant them harm were getting closer, following trails of information and breadcrumbs that would eventually lead to this small sanctuary in the mountains. But inside the cabin, 3 people who had found each other against all odds were choosing love over fear, commitment over safety, and the possibility of a future worth fighting for over the certainty of a life spent running. The documents scattered across Calder's bed could wait until morning. The tactical planning, the difficult conversations with potential allies, the careful preparation for what was coming, all of that would happen in due time. For now, they held each other close and tried to memorize the feeling of being home. Because tomorrow they would begin the most dangerous journey of all, the fight to keep it. Dawn came grey and cold, bringing with it the harsh reality of what they'd committed to in the warm circle of firelight. Calder had spent most of the night awake, his mind cycling through tactical scenarios and contingency plans, while Emma slept between him and Nora on the couch. Her small body finally relaxed in the safety of their combined presence. By 6 a.m., he was pacing the cabin's small kitchen, a cup of black coffee growing cold in his hands as he mentally catalogued resources, weapons, and potential defensive positions. The survival kit he'd always kept ready sat open on the kitchen table, not the emergency supplies of a cautious civilian, but the carefully curated tools of someone who'd spent years preparing for the worst-case scenario. Inside the black duffel bag were items that painted a clear picture of exactly who Marcus Wade had been. Tactical communication equipment, night vision goggles, medical supplies that went far beyond basic first aid, and weapons that were definitely not legal for civilian ownership. Also in the kit were multiple sets of identification documents for both him and Emma, cash in various currencies, and detailed maps of escape routes from 3 different states. "You really were prepared to disappear at any moment," Nora said quietly, joining him in the kitchen while Emma still slept. "For 3 years. This bag was never more than 10 feet from Emma," he said, running his fingers over equipment he'd hoped never to use again. "Every night when I tucked her in, every morning when she went to school, every time we went to the grocery store, I knew exactly how long it would take me to grab this kit and get us both out of wherever we were. That must have been exhausting. It was necessary." His voice was flat, military precise. "Until now." They stood together in the dim kitchen light, both understanding that the moment they began making calls and involving other people, there would be no turning back. The careful civilian life Calder had built would be stripped away, revealing the trained killer underneath. Emma's innocent childhood would be over, replaced by the harsh reality of being a target in a war she never chose. "Are you sure about this?" Calder asked one final time. "Really sure? Because once we start, people are going to get hurt, maybe killed, and it might not work. Nora looked toward the couch where Emma slept, her dark hair spread across the pillow, her face peaceful in a way that spoke of complete trust in the adults who were making decisions about her future. "That little girl has already lost everything once," she said firmly. "Her family, her home, her very identity. She deserves the chance to keep what she's found here. We all do." The first call Calder made was to someone named Rodriguez, a conversation conducted in the kind of tactical shorthand that suggested years of shared operations and mutual trust. From Nora's side of the conversation, she gathered that Rodriguez was former military, currently running security for a private company, and someone who owed Calder several significant favors. "He can be here by tomorrow night," Calder said after ending the call. "Along with 2 other operators I trust absolutely. But Nora, these are hard men who've done hard things. They're not coming here to have a conversation. They're coming to end a threat permanently." The second call was to Sheriff Patricia Hawkins, a 20-year veteran of law enforcement who'd seen enough in her time to recognize when something required resources beyond what her small department could provide. Calder's explanation was carefully edited, but brutally honest about the core facts. Professional killers were coming to Cedar Falls. They were targeting his family, and conventional law enforcement response would likely get people killed. "She wants to meet this afternoon," Calder said after that conversation. "Neutral ground, official capacity. She'll listen, but she needs to see evidence before she commits county resources to what could look like a personal vendetta." By the time Emma woke up, the cabin had been transformed into an operational center. Maps of the surrounding area covered the kitchen table, marked with elevation points, road access, and potential defensive positions. Calder's laptop displayed satellite imagery of approaches to both the cabin and Nora's shop, with optimal sniper positions and escape routes highlighted in different colors. "Daddy's in soldier mode," Emma observed, taking in the transformation with the matter-of-fact acceptance of someone who'd seen this particular metamorphosis before. "Is that scary for you?" Nora asked gently. "Sometimes," Emma said honestly. "When Daddy becomes Soldier Daddy, it means really bad things are happening or about to happen. But it also means he knows how to keep us safe, so it's scared but safe instead of just scared." The distinction was heartbreaking in its precision. This child had learned to find comfort in her father's transformation into a weapon, because experience had taught her that his willingness to become dangerous was directly proportional to how much danger she was facing. "Emma," Calder said, kneeling down to her eye level with the careful attention he always gave to important conversations. "We need to talk about what's going to happen over the next few days. Bad people are coming, and you're going to stop them," Emma said simply. "That's right, but it means we can't stay here at the cabin, and you can't go to the shop like normal. We need to find somewhere safe for you to stay, while the grown-ups handle the dangerous stuff." Emma's face set in stubborn lines that Nora recognized. From their first meeting, the expression of someone who'd learned not to accept being excluded from decisions about her own life. "I want to help," she said firmly. "Sweetheart, this isn't something kids can help with." "I helped before," Emma pointed out. "When we had to leave Colorado really fast, I packed my own bag, and I didn't cry, and I didn't ask questions, and I did exactly what you told me to do. I can help like that." The reminder of their previous escape clearly hit Calder hard. He'd been asking this child to be braver and more resilient than most adults could manage, and she'd risen to every challenge without complaint. "This is different," he said gently. "This time, instead of running away from the danger, we're running toward it. That means there might be shooting and explosions and people trying to hurt everyone we care about. Will Miss Nora be in danger?" "Some, but she'll be with me and I'll keep her safe. Will you be in danger?" "Yes." Emma considered this with her characteristic seriousness, her small hands fidgeting with the hem of her pajama shirt. "If something bad happens to you, what happens to me?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. It was the core fear that had driven every decision Calder had made for 3 years. Not his own safety, but Emma's future if he wasn't there to protect her. Ms. Nora would take care of you, he said quietly. We've already talked about it. If something happens to me, you would live with her, and she would love you and keep you safe just like I do. Emma looked at Nora with solemn eyes. Is that true? Completely true, Nora said without hesitation. If your daddy can't take care of you, I will. For as long as you need me to, even if the bad people try to hurt me. Especially then. Emma nodded, apparently satisfied with the arrangements for her continued care. Okay, then I want to help fight the bad people so that Daddy stays safe and Ms. Nora stays safe and we can all live together in our family. Emma. I know I can't shoot guns or fight with my hands, she continued with practical directness. But I can watch for things and carry supplies and take care of hurt people with the plant medicine Ms. Nora taught me. I can help the way I'm good at helping. Calder looked at Nora over Emma's head, his expression torn between protective instinct and recognition that Emma had a point. She'd been part of this war since before she was old enough to understand what war meant. Trying to shield her from the reality of their situation might actually put her in more danger than including her in their plans. If, and I mean if, you help, he said carefully. You follow orders exactly, immediately, and without question. If I tell you to hide, you hide. If I tell you to run, you run. If I tell you to be quiet, you don't make a sound. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Emma said, using the formal address she'd learned during their previous crisis. The meeting with Sheriff Hawkins took place at the diner in town, chosen because it was public enough to feel non-threatening, but quiet enough for sensitive conversation. Patricia Hawkins was a woman in her 50s, with graying hair and the kind of direct gaze that came from years of dealing with people in crisis. She listened to Calder's explanation without interruption, occasionally making notes in a small leather notebook. So let me make sure I understand, she said when he'd finished. You're a former Navy SEAL operating under a false identity. The child you're protecting is a victim of human trafficking who was never officially rescued. And professional killers are coming to my county to eliminate both of you. That's correct. And you want my department to help you stage an armed confrontation with these killers instead of, say, calling the FBI and letting federal authorities handle it. The FBI can't be trusted, Calder said bluntly. My team was betrayed by someone in the federal chain of command. For all I know, calling the FBI would be like sending these people a GPS coordinate. Sheriff Hawkins was quiet for a long moment, studying Calder's face with the practiced assessment of someone who'd learned to read truth in desperate situations. I'll need proof, she said finally. Documentation, photographs, something that corroborates at least part of this story. Because what you're asking me to do is commit my deputies to a military-style operation based on the word of a man whose legal name I don't even know. Calder reached into his jacket and withdrew a manila envelope, sliding it across the table without ceremony. Photos from the Columbia operation, mission briefings with classification stamps, medical records from the hospital where Sarah Coleman died, Emma's original blood work from when I first brought her back to the States, showing evidence of malnutrition and trauma consistent with trafficking victims. The sheriff opened the envelope carefully, her expression growing more grim with each document she reviewed. When she reached the photographs, images that clearly showed the aftermath of significant violence, her jaw tightened with barely controlled anger. These bastards trafficked a 5-year-old, she said. Not really a question, among others. The network Sarah was investigating moved dozens of children every month. Emma was just the one we managed to save, and now they want her back. They want to eliminate the evidence of their operation. Emma can identify people, places, procedures. As long as she's alive, she's a threat to them. Sheriff Hawkins closed the envelope and leaned back in her chair, her decision-making process visible in the way her expression shifted from skepticism to resolve. My department has 12 full-time deputies and a handful of part-time officers, she said. We're equipped for domestic disputes, drunk drivers, and the occasional drug bust. We are not equipped to take on professional killers. I'm not asking you to take them on, Calder said. I'm asking you to help coordinate with people who are equipped for that. Keep civilians safe, secure the area, provide backup communications. Let the professionals handle the actual confrontation. And if something goes wrong, if your professional friends can't handle these people, then you do what law enforcement does. You protect and serve the people of your county by whatever means necessary. The sheriff was quiet for another long moment, clearly weighing the risks of action against the risks of inaction. Finally, she reached across the table and shook Calder's hand with a grip that spoke of absolute commitment. Deputy Martinez has military experience, she said. Iraq 2 tours. And Deputy Chen did 3 years as an Army Ranger before she came to work for me. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. That evening, as preparations continued in earnest, Emma approached Nora with a question that had clearly been weighing on her mind. Ms. Nora, she said quietly, when this is all over, what happens to us? What do you mean, sweetheart? I mean, do Daddy and I stay here in Cedar Falls? Do we get to keep being your family? Or do we have to disappear again and pretend to be different people? The question cut straight to the heart of what they were really fighting for. Not just Emma's safety or Calder's freedom from pursuit, but the right to build something permanent and real in this place that had become home. If we win, Nora said carefully, then yes. You stay here, you keep going to school, your daddy keeps building furniture and fixing greenhouses. We get to be a family for as long as we all want to be. And if we lose? Nora knelt down and pulled Emma into a fierce hug, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and the lingering traces of chamomile tea that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. Then we'll face whatever comes next together, she said quietly. All 3 of us. No matter what happens, you're not alone anymore. Emma, you'll never be alone again outside. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that spoke of endings and beginnings in equal measure. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation they'd been building toward, the moment when all their careful plans would either succeed or fail spectacularly. But tonight they were still safe, still together, still fighting for the possibility of a future that included Sunday dinners and herb gardens and bedtime stories read in voices full of love rather than fear. Tomorrow they would discover whether love was strong enough to stand against the darkness that had been hunting them. Tonight it was enough that they were willing to try. They came at dawn, just as Calder had predicted they would. The motion sensors he'd placed along the access roads triggered silently at 5:47 a.m., sending alerts to the communication devices that connected him with Rodriguez and the 2 other operators who'd arrived during the night. From their concealed positions around Nora's shop, the location they'd chosen as the most defensible ground, they watched 3 black SUVs navigate the mountain roads with the careful precision of people who understood they were entering hostile territory. Nora crouched behind the makeshift barricade Calder had constructed from shop furniture and sandbags, her hands steady as she monitored the radio communications between the defenders. Emma was safely hidden in the shop's basement with Deputy Martinez, who had volunteered for protection duty despite the obvious danger. 6 hostiles in the lead vehicle. Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio. 4 in the second, 3 in the third. They're armed and moving with military precision. Copy that, Calder responded from his sniper position in the church bell tower across the street. Sheriff, are your people in position? All units ready, Sheriff Hawkins confirmed from the command post they'd established in Murphy's Hardware. Civilians have been evacuated from a 4-block radius. Medical is standing by at the fire station. The first SUV stopped at the corner where Main Street intersected with the road to the mountains, its occupants clearly assessing the seemingly empty downtown area. For a moment, everything was still except for the sound of morning wind moving through the pine trees. Then, the passenger door of the lead vehicle opened, and a man stepped out who made Nora's blood run cold. Tall, expensively dressed, moving with the kind of predatory confidence that spoke of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted through violence. Even from a distance, She could see the scar that ran from his left ear to his jawline, the kind of mark that came from surviving something that should have been fatal. "That's Kozlov." Calder's voice was tight with recognition. "He's the one who betrayed my team in Colombia. He's also the one who's been hunting Emma." The man called Kozlov raised what looked like a small megaphone, his voice carrying clearly across the empty street. "Marcus Wade," he called, using Calder's real name with casual menace. "I know you're here. I know you have the girl. All I want is to finish the conversation we started 3 years ago." Silence stretched between the buildings like a held breath. "You cost me a very profitable operation in Colombia," Kozlov continued. "And the girl you stole has information that belongs to my employers. Return her, and I promise your death will be quick." From her position behind the barricade, Nora felt rage rise in her throat like bile. This man was talking about Emma. Sweet, brave Emma, who made careful drawings and drank healing tea, as if she were an object to be reclaimed rather than a child who deserved protection. "Counter-offer," Calder's voice rang out from the bell tower, amplified by equipment Rodriguez had provided. "You and your people leave Cedar Falls right now, and I won't kill every last one of you." Kozlov's laughter was genuinely amused. "Still the arrogant American soldier. Do you really think you can win against 13 professional operators with your handful of small-town deputies and weekend warriors? Let's find out." The shooting started with the sharp crack of Calder's rifle, dropping one of Kozlov's men before the others could take cover behind their vehicles. After that, the morning erupted into controlled chaos as both sides engaged with the kind of tactical precision that turned a small mountain town into a battlefield. Rodriguez and his team moved like ghosts among the buildings, using their knowledge of the terrain and superior positioning to pick off targets while avoiding the concentrated return fire from the attackers. The sheriff's deputies provided supporting fire and coordinated movement, their military training evident in the way they covered each other's advancement. But Kozlov's people were professionals too, and they adapted quickly to the defensive setup. Within minutes, they'd organized into 3 separate assault teams, using the SUVs as mobile cover while they advanced on the shop from different angles. "They're trying to flank us," Deputy Chen's voice came through the radio, breathless but steady. "Moving up the alley behind the post office. Copy. Rodriguez, can you intercept?" "Already moving." Nora watched through a gap in the barricade as Rodriguez appeared like a shadow at the mouth of the alley, his automatic weapon chattering in short, controlled bursts. 2 of the flanking attackers went down immediately, but the third managed to reach cover behind a dumpster, pinning Rodriguez in place with suppressing fire. "He needs help," Nora said into her radio. "Stay put," Calder ordered. "You're not trained for this." But even as he spoke, she could see the tactical situation developing. The attacker behind the dumpster had a clear line of sight to Rodriguez's position, and sooner or later he would work up the angle to take a killing shot. Unless someone created a distraction. Without allowing herself to think about what she was doing, Nora grabbed one of the smoke grenades Calder had given her and pulled the pin. She counted to 3, then hurled it as hard as she could toward the alley entrance. The smoke billowed instantly, creating a grey wall that blocked the attacker's sightlines. Rodriguez used the cover to change position, and his next burst of fire ended the threat permanently. "Nice throw," his voice came through the radio, and Nora felt a fierce surge of pride at contributing to Emma's protection. The battle continued for another 20 minutes. A deadly game of movement and counter-movement that gradually shifted in favor of the defenders. Kozlov's people were skilled, but they were fighting on unfamiliar ground, against opponents who knew every building, every sightline, every potential advantage, one by one. The attackers were eliminated or forced to retreat to less advantageous positions. By the time the sun had fully risen, only 4 of Kozlov's original 13 remained effective, including Kozlov himself. "This ends now," Calder's voice carried across the battlefield. "Kozlov, just you and me. No weapons, no backup. Winner takes all. And if I refuse, then my friends keep picking off your people until you're the only one left, and then they kill you anyway. At least this way, you get to die fighting instead of cowering behind a car. There was a long pause before Kozlov emerged from behind his SUV, his hands raised to show he carried no weapons. He walked to the center of Main Street with the confidence of someone who'd spent years training for exactly this kind of confrontation. Calder climbed down from the bell tower, moving with the fluid economy of a predator approaching prey. When he reached the street, he stripped off his tactical vest and weapons, leaving himself armed with nothing but his hands and 3 years of rage over what this man had cost him. They circled each other like dancers, each looking for an opening, each understanding that only one of them would walk away from this encounter. When they finally engaged, it was with the brutal efficiency of trained killers who had nothing left to lose. The fight was brief and vicious. Kozlov was skilled, but Calder was fighting for something more powerful than professional pride or criminal profit. He was fighting for Emma's right to live free from fear, for Nora's right to love without terror, for his own right to build a life based on something other than violence. When it ended, Kozlov lay motionless in the dust of Main Street, and Calder stood over him with blood on his knuckles and victory burning in his eyes. Chapter 11. Climax. Part 2. The immediate aftermath of violence was always harder than the violence itself. As the sound of gunfire faded and the smoke cleared, Cedar Falls looked like a war zone. Broken windows, bullet holes in building walls, overturned vehicles, and the kind of damage that would take months to repair, but they had won. Emma emerged from the basement with Deputy Martinez, her face pale but determined as she took in the destruction that had been necessary to keep her safe. She ran straight to Calder, who caught her in a fierce embrace that spoke of a father's relief at having successfully protected his child from the worst the world could offer. "Are the bad people gone?" she asked, her voice small but steady. "They're gone, sweetheart. All of them. They'll never hurt you again." Sheriff Hawkins coordinated the cleanup with the efficiency of someone who'd dealt with crisis situations before, though nothing quite like this one. The surviving attackers were taken into federal custody. It turned out that Rodriguez had contacts in several government agencies who were very interested in dismantling the trafficking network that had been operating for years under official protection. "It's over," Rodriguez told Calder as they watched the last of the evidence being loaded into official vehicles. "The corruption investigation will take months, but Kozlov's network is finished. Emma's safe, and your identity is being officially restored. Marcus Wade is no longer a wanted man." The words seemed to hit Calder with unexpected force. For 3 years, he'd been living in the shadow of a false identity, always ready to run, never able to fully commit to the life he was building. Now suddenly, he was free to choose who he wanted to be without the weight of past secrets or future threats. "What does that mean for us?" Emma asked, apparently following the conversation better than the adults had realized. "It means we get to stay," Calder said, kneeling down to her level. "We get to keep our house and our family and our life here. No more running, no more hiding, no more being afraid of people finding us, and Miss Nora gets to stay too. If she wants to." Emma turned to Nora with eyes that held a mixture of hope and determination that was heartbreaking in its intensity. "Do you want to stay? Do you want to keep being our family?" The question was so much larger than it appeared on the surface. Emma wasn't just asking about living arrangements or continued proximity. She was asking whether Nora was willing to commit to loving them through whatever came next. Whether she was brave enough to choose the complicated joy of building a life with people who'd already survived losing everything once. "Yes," Nora said without hesitation. "I want to stay. I want to be your family for as long as you'll have me." What happened next was something Calder would remember for the rest of his life. Standing in the middle of Main Street, surrounded by the evidence of the battle they'd fought to protect their right to love each other, he took Nora's hands in his and spoke the words that had been building in his heart for weeks. "Nora," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I know this isn't the most romantic setting, and I know we've only known each other for a short time, But I also know that some things are too important to wait for perfect circumstances. He reached into his pocket and withdrew something small wrapped in soft cloth, not a ring. She realized, but something else entirely. This was Sarah's, he said, unwrapping a small silver locket engraved with delicate flowers. She asked me to give it to the woman who would help me raise Emma. When I found someone worthy of that trust, he opened the locket to reveal a photograph of Emma at age 5, taken shortly after he'd first brought her home. The little girl in the picture looked fragile and uncertain, nothing like the confident child who stood beside them now. Sarah said that anyone who could help heal Emma's heart would have proven they understood what it meant to love someone else's child as completely as their own. She wanted that person to have this as a symbol of the family we'd all be building together. Tears were streaming down Nora's face as she accepted the locket, understanding the profound significance of what he was offering her. Not just his own love, but inclusion in a legacy of love that stretched back to include a dying CIA operative who trusted him with her most precious gift. Nora Whitfield, he continued, his voice growing stronger and more certain. Will you marry me? Will you help me raise Emma? Will you let us build a life together that honors everyone we've lost and celebrates everything we've found? Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, absolutely yes. Emma cheered and threw herself into a group hug that included both adults. Her joy infectious enough to make the gathered law enforcement officers and emergency responders break into spontaneous applause. But it was Emma's voice that captured the moment perfectly, carrying across the damaged street with the clarity of someone who understood exactly what had been won through their morning's battle. We did it, she called out, her 8-year-old voice ringing with triumph. We fought for our family and we won. And in that moment, as Calder kissed his future wife while holding his beloved daughter, surrounded by the people who'd chosen to stand with them against impossible odds, he spoke the vow that would define the rest of their lives together. By winter, you'll have my children growing inside you, he said against her lips, the words carrying all the promise and hope and fierce determination that had brought them to this moment. We're going to build something beautiful together, something worth all of this. It wasn't just a declaration of intent, it was a vow that their love would create new life, that their family would grow beyond what trauma had tried to destroy, that the future would be about joy and creation rather than fear and survival. Emma, not quite understanding the adult implications, but sensing the importance of the moment, added her own voice to the promise, and I'm going to be the best big sister ever. Around them, Cedar Falls was already beginning the process of healing and rebuilding. The broken windows would be replaced, the bullet holes filled and painted over, the scars of battle gradually faded by time and care. But the bonds forged in crisis between Calder and Nora, between their small family and the community that had chosen to protect them, those would only grow stronger. As they walked toward healing roots to begin the long process of cleaning up and moving forward, Nora felt Sarah's locket warm against her throat, a tangible reminder that love could transcend death, that family could be built from choice as much as blood, and that sometimes the most beautiful futures grew from the darkest soil. 6 months later, February, the first snow of the real winter, arrived on a Tuesday morning, blanketing Cedar Falls in the kind of pristine white that made every familiar landmark look like something from a fairy tale. Nora stood at the kitchen window of their cabin, officially their cabin now, with papers signed and a mortgage in both their names, watching Emma build a snow fort with the focused determination she brought to all her projects. Her hand rested on the gentle curve of her belly, where Calder's promise was becoming beautifully, tangibly real. At 4 months along, she was just beginning to show, and the doctor in Denver had confirmed what her grandmother's remedies and her own intuition had already told her. She was carrying twins. Daddy says twins run in his family, Emma had announced when they'd shared the news with her, which means I'm going to have 2 babies to teach everything to instead of just one. That's going to be a lot of work, but I think I'm ready for it. The wedding had been small and perfect, held in the rebuilt greenhouse on a crisp October afternoon when the autumn colours were at their peak. Emma had walked down the aisle first, scattering flower petals and practically glowing with pride at her role as both flower girl and maid of honour. Sheriff Hawkins had officiated, Rodriguez had served as best man, and half the town had crowded into the space to celebrate the union of three people who'd fought for their right to become a family. Calder's vow that day had been simple and devastating in its honesty. I promise to love you through whatever storms come, to build with you whatever peace we can find, and to never stop fighting for the life we're creating together. Nora's response had been equally direct. I promise to heal what can be healed, to hold what needs holding, and to choose this love every single day for the rest of my life. But it was Emma who'd stolen the show with her own addition to the ceremony, speaking directly to Nora with the clarity that had always been her gift. I promise to be the best daughter I can be, and to help take care of our babies when they come, and to always remember that you chose to love us even when it was scary and hard. Now, watching Emma through the snow-covered window, Nora marveled at how naturally they'd all settled into their new roles. Calder had officially reclaimed his identity as Marcus Wade and started a custom furniture business that was already drawing clients from 3 counties. His pieces, sturdy, beautiful things, made with the precision of someone who understood that what you built with your hands needed to last, were becoming known throughout the region. Emma was thriving in school, her quick mind and artistic talents earning praise from teachers who had no idea what she'd survived to get there. Her health had stabilized completely on the herbal remedies, and she'd become Nora's unofficial assistant in the shop, greeting customers with confidence and helping prepare simple teas with the competence of someone twice her age. The shop itself had been expanded and renovated, with a new wing dedicated to children's wellness and family counseling. Nora had partnered with a therapist from Denver who specialized in trauma recovery, offering a holistic approach that combined traditional healing with modern psychological support. They were booked solid through the spring, helping families who'd heard about the unusual success stories coming out of Cedar Falls. The babies are active today, Nora said, as Calder joined her at the window, wrapping his arms around her from behind and settling his hands over her growing belly. They're going to be fighters like their mom, he said, pressing a kiss to her temple, and probably as stubborn as their big sister. Through the window, they watched Emma add the finishing touches to her snow fort, complete with carefully shaped windows and what appeared to be a small flag made from one of her old t-shirts. What do you think she's building over there? Nora asked, knowing Emma. Probably a safe house for injured wildlife, or a medical station for snow angels, or a fortress to protect the herb garden from winter damage. They were all reasonable guesses. Emma's imagination had always run toward protection and healing. Her games and projects focused on creating safety for vulnerable things. It was how she processed her own early trauma, by becoming someone who sheltered others from the kind of harm she'd experienced. The kitchen door burst open, bringing with it a swirl of snow and cold air and Emma's excited chatter. "Come see what I built," she announced, kicking off her boots and shaking snow from her coat with practiced efficiency. "It's a special project for the babies." She led them outside, bouncing with the kind of energy that suggested something truly important was about to be revealed. The snow fort was indeed impressive. But what made Nora catch her breath was the small garden space Emma had carefully cleared and marked with stakes driven into the frozen ground. "It's going to be their first garden," Emma explained seriously. "I measured it so each baby gets exactly the same amount of space, and I already picked out what we're going to plant. Chamomile for when they have tummy troubles, and lavender for when they need to sleep, and mint for when they want their milk to taste good." "Sweetheart," Calder said gently, "babies can't eat solid food for months after they're born." "I know that," Emma said with the patience of someone explaining something obvious to slow adults. "But the garden will be ready when they are. And besides, Miss Nora can use the herbs in her teas while she's nursing them." so they'll get the benefits even before they can eat real food. The thoughtfulness of the plan, the way she'd already worked out the practical details of caring for siblings who wouldn't be born for months, left both adults speechless with love. "Emma," Nora said softly, "that's the most beautiful gift anyone could give them. Do you think they'll like it?" "I think they'll love it. And I think they're incredibly lucky to have you as their big sister." That evening, after Emma had gone to bed with a new book and promises to read quietly for only 30 minutes before lights out, Nora and Calder sat by the fire discussing the kinds of domestic details that had once seemed impossible to imagine. "We'll need to convert the spare room into a nursery," Calder said, his hands busy with the wood carving he'd taken up as a way to process the peaceful emotions that were still sometimes harder to handle than dangerous ones. "And childproof everything," Nora added. "Emma's old enough to know what's safe and what isn't. But twins are going to be a whole different level of chaos. Good chaos, though. The best kind." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in contemplation of the future they were building together. Outside, the snow continued to fall, adding layers of quiet beauty to a world that had once seemed defined by uncertainty and fear. "Marcus," Nora said, using his real name with the pleasure she still felt at being able to speak it freely. "Do you ever think about what Sarah would say if she could see us now?" He was quiet for so long, she wondered if she'd overstepped by bringing up the woman whose blessing had made their family possible. But when he finally spoke, his voice was warm with certainty. "I think she'd be proud," he said. "Emma's healthy and happy and safe. She's got a mother who loves her completely, and siblings on the way who'll grow up knowing they're part of something bigger than themselves." Sarah wanted Emma to have a family, not just people taking care of her, but real belonging. Mission accomplished. "And what about you? Are you happy?" The question was one she'd been carrying for weeks, needing to hear his answer but afraid of what it might be. This man had given up everything to protect a child who wasn't biologically his, had built and lost and rebuilt again, had fought literal battles for the right to choose love over survival. Was domestic happiness enough for someone who'd lived at such extremes? "Nora," he said, setting down his carving and turning to face her fully, 3 years ago, I thought happiness was just the absence of immediate danger. I thought the best I could hope for was keeping Emma alive and unafraid, maybe finding some peace in quiet places." He reached over and took her hands, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "Now I wake up every morning in a bed I share with my wife, in a house we own together, listening to our daughter getting ready for school, and knowing that our babies are growing healthy and strong. I spend my days building things that will last instead of planning escapes. I fall asleep every night knowing that tomorrow will bring more of the same beautiful, ordinary, extraordinary life we've created." His voice grew rough with emotion. "This isn't just happiness, Nora. This is joy. This is the kind of deep contentment I didn't even know was possible." As if summoned by their conversation, Emma appeared in the hallway in her pajamas, hair braided for sleep and clutching the wooden bird that remained her most treasured possession. "I heard talking," she said, padding over to join them by the fire. "Are you having grown-up worries about the babies?" "No worries," Nora assured her, making room on the couch. "Just grown-up gratitude about everything good in our lives." "Oh." Emma settled between them with the satisfaction of someone claiming her rightful place. "I have that too, especially at night time when everyone's safe and warm and together. What does grown-up gratitude feel like for an 8-year-old? Calder asked, smoothing her braided hair. "Like my heart is too full for my body," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Like I might float away from how happy I am. Except I'm anchored down by how much I love you both." The simple poetry of her description captured something essential about the life they'd built together. A happiness so complete it felt almost gravity-defying, balanced by love that kept them grounded in the real world of daily choices and shared responsibilities. Later, after Emma had been tucked back into bed with additional hugs and promises that they'd still be there in the morning, Nora and Calder stood together in their bedroom, preparing for sleep in the unhurried way of people who had nowhere else they needed to be. 6 months ago, I was alone, Nora said, brushing her hair with slow, meditative strokes. My biggest concerns were inventory management and whether Mrs. Hartwell would remember to take her arthritis tea twice daily instead of 3 times. 6 months ago, Emma and I were living like ghosts, Calder replied, changing into sleep clothes with the efficiency of old habit, always ready to disappear, never able to put down roots or make real plans. And now we're planting gardens for babies who won't be born until summer. Now we're talking about college funds and family traditions and whether we want to add on to the house or look for something bigger. Nora set down her brush and turned to face him, taking in the sight of this man who'd become her anchor and her adventure all at once. In the soft lamplight, the tension lines around his eyes had smoothed into something approaching peace. "By winter, you said," she reminded him, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. "You promised that by winter I'd have your children growing inside me." "Best promise I ever made," he said, crossing to her and pulling her into his arms. "Best promise I ever kept." Outside their window, Cedar Falls slept under its blanket of snow, the small mountain town that had given them sanctuary and witnessed their transformation from broken individuals into something whole and strong and lasting. In the spring, Emma's garden would bloom with healing herbs for the siblings she'd never met but already loved. In the summer, twin babies would arrive to complete a family that had been built from choice and commitment rather than chance. But tonight, as Nora fell asleep in her husband's arms, with their children safe in her womb and their daughter secure in the next room, she understood that they'd already achieved everything that mattered. They'd fought for love and won. They'd chosen each other and been chosen in return. They'd learned that sometimes the most beautiful futures grew from the most difficult ground, and in the quiet darkness of their shared bedroom, surrounded by the sounds of their family breathing safely through another peaceful night, Nora Whitfield Wade finally understood what it meant to be completely, unshakably home.